In this week's episode of The Truth About Business, you'll discover the following 3 insights. Number 1, why you should always start with the end in mind when you launch your business. Number 2, why sometimes to get further faster, you actually have to slow down. And number 3, how you pick yourself up when your business literally burns down to the ground. So stay tuned for all of that and so much more on this week's episode of The Truth About Business. I'm Benjamin Brain, and by day I'm a director of a multi-award-winning family-run business. And by night I interview successful business owners to share their journeys, experiences and truths to serve as inspiration, motivation and first-hand education for like-minded entrepreneurs and wantrepreneurs to fast-track our own business success. This is the truth about business, told by those who have been there, done that and have the scars to prove it. From the good times to the bad, the marketing strategies and sales tactics to the productivity hacks and success habits. I'm here to give you the de-sugar-coated version of what it's really like and what really works. If you're thinking of starting a business or are already in business, I created this for you. So let's get started. In this week's episode, I talk business with Deborah Labbate. Deborah started her entrepreneurial career straight out of college back in the early 80s when she and her father started a self-drive hire business, growing it from a standing start to a fleet of 100 plus vehicles and 2 petrol stations, and successfully suing a major multinational corporation along the way. After selling her business literally the day before her 2 twin boys were born and taking a career break to look after her family, Deborah soon got the itch back, and after a number of successful positions and appointments, decided to use her own experiences and business knowledge to help others succeed. Today, Deborah is the unstoppable force behind Deborah Labbate, where she serves as an advisor and consultant to help other ambitious businesses of all shapes and sizes go further, faster. Deborah's also a published author, has organised and hosted several excellent business events, and has served as the president of the Nottingham City Business Club. To find out more about Deborah and the services she provides, you can find her at www.deborahLabbate.com, which is 2 B's and 1 T, or you'll find her on LinkedIn under the same name. This was another brilliant interview with an inspirational entrepreneur who is the personification of not taking no for an answer and always finding a way. You know, success leaves footprints. So let's take a walk with the determined and resilient lifelong entrepreneur, Deborah Labbate. But before we do, I just want to give a quick shout out to Steve at VPS for his amazing 5-star review that he left for the show on iTunes. Steve said, "Really good episode of the podcast with Steve Gandy. I had the good fortune to work with Steve in the past and it had a massive influence on me personally and my business. So valuable to have a podcast like this done very well that business people can tap into as it's very lonely at the top. Keep up the great work, Benjamin, and I look forward to hearing who's up next." So thank you, Steve. It really did make my day to see that, and reading comments like those is what keeps me putting in the work to make this podcast happen. So if you enjoyed today's episode and would love a shout out on next week's show, you know what to do. Let's get back to the interview. Okay, so Deborah, welcome to the Truth About Business podcast, and thank you for taking some time to share your own business experiences with us today.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Right, so we'll go in with the first question, which is, Deborah, if you could tell us what's the one thing that you're really good at, what's your speciality, what would it be?
I would say that that's strategy, but I have to have 2 things because I have to have operations to go along with that. Okay. It's no good having a strategy without a way to actually execute it. It's all very well talking about the strategy, but how are you actually going to do it?
If you could give us some examples of businesses where you've gone in and helped them with their strategy and operations, have you got a couple of ideas or examples of the things that you've done to help them improve these areas?
Yeah, I think I would start by just maybe clarifying strategy, because I think it's a really overused word. If I give you a dictionary definition of that, and in a business context, it's the long-term plan of action designed to achieve a particular goal or set of goals or objectives. So it's the goals of the business ultimately.
Yeah. And do you tend to find that business owners, obviously we hear about strategy a lot, but they're not actually quite clear on what the definition is? So actually what you're saying, the strategy is the sort of the overall plan.
That's right.
Of where you want to take things, and then the operations is...
It's the delivery of that plan. And depending on what the business is, how big the business is, how many departments there are, there could be operational issues in different departments. So it's getting those really slick, running smoothly, but also getting them talking to each other and not just sort of running in silos.
And a couple of examples of where you've gone in and helped businesses with their strategy and operations. Are there any that stand out from the people that you've worked with?
Well, over the years, there's been a lot. So to pull out just two, if I go with a startup and a more established business, because their needs are really quite different. So with a startup cleaning company that's sort of coming to my mind, and the guy who started that was an engineer by trade, so very structured in his thinking and in his approach, and quite interesting to work with, because of that. But he set the business up with a very clear plan of how he wanted to scale it. I won't say it's 100% gone to plan, because these things don't usually, but he has scaled it. But he's put in operational processes. So every time he brings on a new team member as the business is growing, he's got a training structure in place. So some of it's video, some of it's written, some of it's hands-on training. You need a bit of that as well. But it's consistent. So operationally, he's very slick. And the delivery from a customer service perspective is very slick, because they're always getting the same level of service because of the way he's put that in place. So that would be one example. A more established business came to me about 7 years ago, and I'm still working with them. But initially that was for the managing director, he wanted to get more out of the senior management team. So that was looking at what he ultimately wanted to achieve for the business and for himself, and then looking at the strategy to actually execute that, and what needed to be put in place to get that senior management team buying in to his vision, so the way that was being communicated to them.
Okay, so it can make a big, big difference to the performance and eventually where the business gets to by having these things in place. So from the businesses that you meet and the business owners that you meet that don't have the strategy and the operations really nailed down, and they haven't invested the time to get that right, what do you think the reason for that is? Do you think it is because there is such a sort of ambiguity around the word strategy, or do you think that it perhaps doesn't have the results that you've seen from the businesses that you've worked with?
I think you hit the nail on the head at the beginning of saying that, and that is they haven't taken the time. Maybe they took the time in the beginning when they started the business, but they haven't reviewed it regularly. So, sometimes it feels counterproductive, but take a bit of time out, and it's almost corny to say it, to work on the business, not in it. And that's what I see not happening. And you need to do that to grow. And if you don't grow and you just stand still, eventually you'll go backwards.
Yeah, and for because it's a situation for so many of the people that we speak to, and you often hear about it on videos and in books, is the importance of spending time working on the business versus working in it. Mm-hmm. Are there any tips that you can give for people who are in that situation now to allow themselves to step away and spend more time working on it? Because I think it's one of those things that sometimes people don't realise that they're not doing, but also I think there's a lot of people that are conscious that they're not working on the business, but they're sort of firefighting all day, every day, and as much as you start off the day with a plan of being able to spend some time doing that, it just never happens.
Yeah, it's an age-old problem, I think. It just comes down to discipline, time management, having a good team around you so that you can take the time to work on it and not in it. But how do you get there? Because until you've got the right team around you so that you can take the time out, it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. There's not an easy answer to that. You just have to find the time to do it. So you have to look at what you're doing. I mean, one of my straplines was helping business owners go further faster. And the way I help people go further faster sometimes is to get them to stop first. So you have to slow down, look at what you've got, look at where you are, decide where you want to go, and then start taking the steps to do it. I had a situation one time with somebody who needed a new website because theirs was rubbish, and I agreed theirs was rubbish, but why do you want one was my question. And they said, well, because that one's rubbish. Yeah, but why do you actually want it? What do you want it to do? Well, we're not doing things right. We need to be on social media. We need to be on LinkedIn. We need to be on Twitter. We need to be... I said, no, you don't need to be in any of those places yet because you haven't got your fundamentals right. So you need to just stop. Think about what the end game is, and then we'll reverse engineer it. So they ended up with a fantastic website. They were a recruitment company, so it was the client side of the website and then the job seeker side of the website. So it was quite technically I'm not that techie. It was quite technically challenging pulling it together to get both those sides to work together. But then obviously getting the brand around that right, but getting all those things in place before they started on the social media. And that's no different to any other area of the business. You've got to get that foundation right before you can start doing the next bits. And some people try to just do the next bits without doing the first bit.
Yeah, well, it's the exciting bit, isn't it? You know, they're posting on social media and they're setting up the accounts. And when you start in a business, everything's exciting. And so is that what you tend to find then? Is that rather than working on these foundations that a business can grow off and scale up on, people aren't really spending the time on that. They're going more for the exciting stuff that interests them. And then they'll regret it later on down the line when they haven't spent the time and realised that they should have.
Yeah, and very often I'll really, go back to basics with the business owner and look at the values of the person as well as the business. When they haven't done this or they haven't visited that for a long time, get those foundations right first and you can build everything else from it. But having a really clear vision of where you want to take, where you want your business to get to, and being clear about what your exit is, even if you're just starting. You might not execute it in that way, but it's that old saying, isn't it, about starting with the end in mind. And the other one is fail to plan, plan to fail.
So you've mentioned there about at least having a rough idea of what your exit's going to be. I mean, that's certainly something that I've never considered before, but that's something that you recommend to anybody, even that's just starting out in business and is starting to formulate their ideas, is, like you say, start with the very end in mind, so you've got something to work towards. Because I suppose ultimately, however long you want to be in business for, the whole point of building a business is to at some point exit in some way so you can enjoy the life that you're working towards.
Even if you start out with that as a clear idea, the world will change. Whether you change with it or not, the world will change. And if I can give you a personal example of a business, I started my first business and we had very ambitious plans for it and we executed a lot of those plans. But fast forward 14 years in, and I decided having a family was more important than having a business. And at that time, the world was a very different place. We didn't work remotely. We didn't use mobile phones and technology in the way that we do now. And so at 14 weeks pregnant, I decided that if we could sell the business, that would be my preferred option. Now, that wasn't part of the original exit strategy, but life circumstances had changed considerably from when we first made those plans. But the way that we actually executed that wasn't that dissimilar to the way it would have been if we'd have carried on for a number of more years.
And so for any business owners or entrepreneurs that are listening now and they're sort of feeling that they haven't got quite their operations and strategy as tight as they'd like to be, what's the one tip or one action that you can leave with the audience today so that they can go away tomorrow and at least take a first step towards making that better?
Make yourself find the time to get out of the office, go and sit wherever it is you want to sit, and really think about what you want to achieve.
And you as an individual, as the business owner, not necessarily the business itself, it's what do you want to get out of this?
Well, I guess if the business is a partnership or you've got significant stakeholders in it, maybe it's a combined conversation. But my experience with most business owners is, whilst they might be part of that management team, it might be a smaller organisation, ultimately the book's got to stop with somebody. And I guess it's that person I'm talking to when I'm saying take the time out, go and work out what it is you want to achieve, and don't let the business work you.
Great tip. Thank you for sharing that. So we know a bit about your speciality, Deborah, the strategy and the operations and the benefits that come with that. And I'd like to find out a little bit about your own business journey and your own story and how you've got to where you are today.
Okay.
So could you give us a bit of an overview? You've said you started your first business when you were young, of how that started and where that led you to, and ultimately what got you to the point that you're at today.
Okay. I went to college and I did a business diploma. And I applied for a couple of jobs and I got one. And at the 11th hour, my dad said, I've got an idea. And I asked him what it was and he told me. And I said, what do I know about that? And he said, well, probably that much less than me. I'm demonstrating with...
It's not a lot.
Not a lot, is it? So, about half an inch there. And I'd spent a lot of time, summer holidays, Christmas holidays, at work with my parents. And thought, I'm going to get roped into this one way or the other, whether I've got an employed job elsewhere. So what we identified was a gap in the market for a local independent car rental company to compete on quality with the nationals, Hertz, Avis, Godfrey Davis of the time. So that's what we did. And we started with 4 cars, a minibus and a van. And we scaled that up to a fleet of 80 plus vehicles, and we used to buy in a consortium with other rental companies. And at one time, we were buying in such volume to get the deals that we did, we were actually changing our fleet every 13 weeks. So when I talk about operations, there was a lot of stuff had to be done.
I can imagine.
And you didn't do road tax for cars online back then. I can remember standing in the tax office with wads of paper manually filled in to go and tax all these cars, and then physically changing tax lists on windscreens and stuff. The world really was a very different place. So that was how that business started. And we were in an out-of-town location and wanted to be more central. We eventually identified a site in the city centre, and we moved into there, and there was... It had been a petrol station previously. So we had the choice of either filling in the petrol tanks or selling petrol. We needed petrol for ourselves. So we thought, well, we'll give it a bit of a go. We didn't know much about selling petrol, but we didn't know much about car rental either at that point. And so we bought 4 reconditioned pumps. We built a little wooden hut that sat in the middle, and we had 2 guys in white coats on split shifts that would come out and serve you. There'll be a whole load of people listening to this who have no idea what I'm talking about because they've never seen a petrol station where they get served.
No.
You're smiling.
I'm one of them.
You're one of them. Yeah, okay. Well, I'm showing my age now, but hey, never mind. So anyway, much to everybody's amazement, including our own, we sold an amazing amount of fuel. And we wanted more space. And we actually ended up buying the 2 buildings above us. And some things will probably come out later in this interview, but I'll just pull this in for a second. In terms of being determined and not taking no for an answer. One of the buildings above us was almost derelict, and we were struggling to find out who owned it. And then we thought we knew who owned it, and we went to them, and they went, "It's not ours." And probably knocking on 12 months later, they came back to us and went, "Actually, it is ours. We better come and talk to you about it." So that building actually got knocked down. And then the building above us, we had the underside of it for parking, and the top side of it, we needed to develop it into something. And again, not taking no for an answer, to and fro with the planners over a number of months before we actually got planning consent to do something with it. So on the one hand, the council wanted us to have it. On the other hand, then they didn't want us to do anything with it. So we had to battle with the planners. But we actually built a restaurant, which we built, and then we let it. We never actually ran that part of it. So we were in the city centre site. We were with a well-known oil company for our fuel supply. And later we took to another site, which was in Loughborough, which was about an hour away from where we were. And they were disposing of sites, but they wanted us to go in as a tenant initially, which we did. And 12 months on, when we were supposed to be taking ownership of it, they changed their minds. So they were in breach of contract in our eyes. And they just shrugged their shoulders, had very little interest in our opinion of anything. And we sued them. And the judge said, well, good on the little man for taking on the big boy. And we won that case. And it's the lessons that come out of experiences like that, and knowing there's always another way, and not taking no for an answer.
Yeah, so that's going to be, from our conversations that we've had before we started the interview, I know there is a strong theme of that throughout your whole business career. That attitude of there is always another way. Is that something that you feel you were born with, or is that something that has been developed through these business experiences?
That's a bit like, is it nature or nurture, isn't it?
Maybe a bit of both.
Yeah, maybe a bit of both. It's interesting, actually, because my father was employed at one time and then became self-employed. I've been self-employed all my working life. I've got 2 boys. They're in their mid-20s now, and they're both running their own businesses as well. So is it nature or nurture? That's probably a conversation for another day. That's a whole other hour's
That's an interesting
debate,
conversation,
isn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, I've definitely been influenced by my father, but I grew up around business, you know, say from quite a young age. And even my mother's sister, she had a business over in Spain, and we used to go over there as well. So I've been seeped in business.
Yeah, and it's obvious that you had an interest from a very early age, because you obviously went to college to study business. So at that point, did you always have aspirations of being a business owner, or was that just normal life to you?
I think it was just normal life to me. Yeah.
Going back to you obviously sued the petrol company successfully. The judge had ruled in your favour. What happened next?
Well, we parted company with them because we didn't like them very much after that.
Understandably so, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then within a couple of years of that, it brought me to that point where I was expecting twin boys. I didn't know they were going to be boys at that time, but anyway, so expecting twins. And we decided if we could sell, we would. I won't go into a huge amount of detail about this part, but if I just rewind 12 months, and in terms of letting go of the reins a bit and learning to delegate, and this kind of fits with this taking time out. I had a health issue that needed major surgery, and I had 3 months off to go and have that surgery. So who was going to run things whilst I was off? At this point, my father's gone off and done other businesses, and this is kind of just me. So I employed someone to do a big chunk of my job. And she did a good job, but it was only a good job. It wasn't exceptional. And I think this is something business owners sometimes have to just learn to swallow, is that nobody will ever be you. Nobody will do things like you do them. But you can't scale and grow unless you employ people. You can't do it all yourself. But having had that 3 months off, I had a lot of thinking time. And when I came back, and probably partly due to the health issues and things, and it turned out to be a more serious operation than they originally thought it was going to be, my perspective on life had changed a little bit. But I actually had the time to think. And then when I came back, I did look at things very differently. And so I started to think, what is the exit going to look like? Because this industry is changing massively. We're moving with it at a pace, but is it sustainable at that pace? So whilst we may have looked to have more locations, grow the fleet even more, the market was changing. And I started to pay more attention to that because I'd taken the time out. Now, the time out was enforced on me. What I'm recommending is that you find the time to pay attention and go and look at other industries. Go, look in other sectors and see how they're managing certain things, because lots of that is transferable. So that sort of influenced, I think, my decision 12 months later when I am 14 weeks pregnant, and my dad said, what do you actually want to do? And I said, well, if we can exit, that's what I ideally would want, what I would want to do. And we did, and we found a buyer, and we sold, and we moved out on the Friday, and I gave birth on the Monday.
Close call.
Nothing like a deadline to focus the mind.
And so you'd obviously had, what was the time period between you having that 3 months off and then giving birth to the twins and selling the business?
18 months.
Okay, and how did you'd obviously built that business up for 13 years. You've said you had a massive fleet of cars. You had plans to scale to all these other locations. You'd also had that time to reflect on what you actually wanted out of life and out of the business. How easy a decision was it to decide to sell it?
I think at that point, with the other business interests that my father had taken on, he didn't really want it back. And so you've got to remember the world was a different place at this time. There wasn't the technology that there is now to work remotely. There wasn't even the day nurseries where you might put your children at that time. The world was a different place. So I think the decision was it was quite easy. And I suppose I'm not a great believer in luck as such. I think it's opportunity meeting preparation. That's how kind of my definition of luck. But had we have not sold it, then I guess we would have carried on trying to sell it, and my dad maybe would have had to have come back in, or would have had to find someone to do part of my job for me, because how would I have been able to do both?
At the time that you took the career break to look after the children, did you have any sort of timescales in place before that as to when you would come back to business life and what you were going to do? Or having already had the knowledge that you could build a business, did you just have the confidence and belief in yourself to know that when you did make the decision to get back into the world of business, you'd be able to come back strong and do the same thing again?
Yeah, I think that first 12 months was pretty intense with having two of them at the same time.
But yeah, I can't imagine. I've had two at separate times, so I know how hard it is just for that.
Yeah. I don't think it happened exactly like this, but it was a bit like I woke up on their first birthday and thought, oh my God, what have I done? There was definitely feelings of losing identity. Going from a business owner to I didn't have a name anymore. I was just their mum. I felt like I got a little bit lost in that. And I ended up, I was a member of T.A.B, which is the Twins and Multiple Birth Association. And I was on the phone one night getting a bit of advice on sleep and feeding issues. They'd be about 9 months at the time, I think. And I was in awe of the lady I was talking to because she got triplets. So it made having twins, it's got to be easier, isn't it? And I came off the phone and I remember saying, I think I've just got a job. I'll ring her back tomorrow and clarify that. And I actually became a volunteer for T.A.B. And I became the regional coordinator for one of their Midlands groups, which was great because it got me out talking to people, doing things, stretching my comfort zone because I was having to go and do presentations and stuff, which I was quite out of the loop with. So it helped with that. And they gave me some very basic counselling training, but it sort of sparked my interest in that area at that time. We'll park that for a second. But it's like, actually, I can do other things and be a mum. So I actually started selling children's books and children's clothes for a while, just as it was for something to do as much as anything. I didn't make a huge amount of money doing it. It wasn't on a massive scale. But I was mixing in circles where there was a market. So
back to sort of sharpening your tools, getting yourself ready to get
just
out there.
do something.
Fully. Yeah.
And then as they were approaching 10 and coming towards the end of primary school, I'm starting to think, I need to do something now at this point. And my own mum had done that. She'd gone back to work when I was about 11. So I guess there's a bit of a pattern there. And I went back to look at the counselling, looking at doing some retraining, and thought, actually, it's not quite ticking my boxes. It's not quite for me. And I went and got myself a coach to help me work out, what I wanted to do next. And that sparked my interest in coaching. So I ended up doing a coaching qualification, which took me 12 months.
Had you had a business coach in the past, or was that the first time?
No, that was the first time.
Where did the idea come from to go for that? Because coaching and consulting and mentoring is obviously, it's a huge industry now, but we're talking sort of, 20 years ago?
I'm talking about 20 years ago. No, probably not quite. About 15, 18 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
So was this a business coach, or was it a life coach, or what?
She had a training business, and she was more of a life coach than a business coach. But she did run the training business as well. So she had a business. She had quite a bit of business nous about her, and she actually did some training for the company that I ended up doing my coach training with. So I did that. I came out the other side of that 12 months later with a really rose-tinted view about what my new coaching business was going to look like. And then I got introduced to a local enterprise agency, and I started doing some business mentoring for them. And at that point, what I'd done was sort of rule a line under my previous professional life. And I got this new business that I was starting. And I began to realise that I actually had quite a lot of business knowledge. And maybe if I put the two things together, that's what I should go off and do. So at that time, I started a business which I called Star Coaching. STAR was like an acronym for Shine Through Achieving Results. I changed my name later with respect to all the coaches out there that might listen to this. But I came across a lot of coaches that didn't have a business background, and I did. So I decided that I wouldn't be a coach, I'd be something else. And I'm not a big fan of job titles at all. So business advisor maybe, business consultant, business mentor. I would say coaching is something that is a tool that I use as opposed to what I am. And if I can describe a spectrum of how I work, at one end you've got pure non-directive coaching, which is how I was trained. So I'm going to ask you lots of really good questions, but I'm not going to tell you anything. Most of my business clients don't want that. Then you move into slightly more directive coaching, which you might liken to sports coaching. And then you move into the business mentoring space. So now I'm going to share a bit of wisdom, perhaps. I may be sharing my network with you. And I've built up a really solid network over the years. And then you move into advice and consultancy, and then teaching and training, and then sometimes rolling your sleeves up and actually doing it. And the way I work with clients is I do all of that, not at the same time, but with a startup business, they need different things at different stages. With an established business, again, they may want different things at different stages. So being able to work across that spectrum and pull on the right tools at the right time to get the right result is the way I work. And
even though you had spent your first 13 years in business in the hire business, did you find that there are a lot of experience and tactics and strategies and business foundations that would cross over to any industry? Was that really, like you said, that gave you an advantage over other competing coaches maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I took a lot of that business knowledge later into another business. I became involved in a car body repair business. And that was, well, when that closed, it had actually been established 34 years, which is pretty good going for most businesses. But a lot of my business knowledge around operational things, legal things, HR, that was all transferable. And one of the things that a previous client wrote in a testimonial was he thought it was really useful, me not having his industry knowledge, because I asked some really good questions that sometimes were really quite simple because I didn't have a full understanding of that industry. And that really worked.
So, sorry, Deborah, before I interrupted the train of thought, you changed your name. So what was the story going from there?
Yes, so I sat down with a marketing person and went through what I was doing, what I wanted to achieve, who my current clients were, who I wanted to attract, and what should my brand look like moving forward. And I've sort of I've always kept that sort of star within my branding, and I'm known as Deborah Star on Twitter. I'm wearing one.
Yes, definitely, I can confirm
you
that.
can confirm that. So it was like, who are you when you're doing this? Well, I'm Deborah Labbate. Who are you when you're doing this? Well, I'm Deborah Labbate. And so this conversation went on, and then it was almost in stereo. We both said, why don't we just call me Deborah Labbate? So that's where that came from. So it's deborahLabbate.com, but as a business name, deborahLabbate.com is not really a name. So Deborah Labbate Business Solutions is what I tend to go with. But I'm just Deborah Labbate.
Simple but effective.
And simple. Business is actually simple. People complicate it.
So once you'd qualified as a coach and you were looking to launch yourself as a business, what would you have said was the biggest challenge for you during those first 12 months or the early stages of launching that?
I think because the way that people market or were marketing, those few years ago when I started that, was very different to when I was marketing my car rental. Then it was local press, yellow pages. People didn't have websites. So I was on a steep learning curve about all of those things. I mean, it took 2 or 3 months to get my first website somewhere where I was like, okay, you can hit the go live button, with it now. And I'm on iteration number 3 now, not just from the name change from Star Coaching to deborahLabbate.com, but just because what I'm delivering has changed, and that's evolved almost with each client.
Yeah, and so the world was obviously a massively different place from when you had sold the first business, the car hire, to coming back to coaching. I presume that there was IT was a bigger part of business now, and like you said,
absolutely.
Marketing was different. Did you find challenges with that?
Yeah, well, I can remember in terms of having to just keep learning new stuff. I had a client say, "Do you think I should be on Twitter?" And my response was, "Well, I've never really thought about it, but yeah, actually, it's something you probably should look at." And he said, "Well, I don't know anything about it." I said, "Well, neither do I, so I'll go and find out." And some people have gone off Twitter. I still love Twitter, so I went off and learned all I could learn about it. I went on a couple of courses. I read loads of stuff online. I set up my own profile and started using it and, learning from a hands-on perspective. You just have to learn fast. And if you're going to get it wrong, fail fast.
Absolutely. And how did you find your first paying client as Deborah Business Coach?
That came through my connections through the enterprise agency. And one of the things that I ended up doing on the back of that, they actually had a role of a business advisor. And they asked me if I would apply. And I'd never had a proper job, so I really wasn't very sure about that at the time. And I sat in on 1 or 2 business advice sessions with a more experienced advisor. And again, it's like with the business mentoring and changing the shape of that initial coaching business, I realised I knew a lot of stuff, but I didn't really realise at that point that it had any great value. It was just, I'd just been running my business, didn't realise I got experience and knowledge that I could pass on to someone who was in that concept that were looking to start up. So I didn't want a full-time job because I did want to sort of, grow my own business. So I took a part-time contract with them, and I did that alongside running my own business.
And how has the marketing changed from when you first started to now? Do you have to do a lot of marketing, or is it more word of mouth? And as you refer to, using your network, or how has that changed?
I mean, I have my own website. It's probably due an overhaul, if I'm perfectly honest. So I need to spend a bit of time practicing what I preach and work on my business, not just in it.
Okay.
But it's very much a brochure. I know that I don't do things with it that lots of other businesses do with theirs, around SEO and that kind of thing. So it's something I know about, but I know experts through my network that are much better placed to talk about that than me. I have had work through Twitter. I've had work through LinkedIn. So I do make sure I put time and effort into keeping those profiles up to date, and I post articles, etc. I do write blogs and things like that. But most of my clients now just come through word of mouth and recommendations through my network. But I have put a lot of time into growing my network to what it is today.
And how have you managed to grow that network? Is that through going to networking events or just connecting with people, or how have you gone about that?
It's a bit of a mixture of things, really. I'm a past president of Nottingham City Business Club. I first joined the club in 2007 as a member, and then I joined the council that actually runs the club. I was invited to join that, and then on the back of that I became vice president and then president. And the club's been going for 95 years. This is a good plug for Nottingham City Business Club, isn't it? It's been going for 95 years, so we're celebrating that, this current year. And they didn't actually let women in until 1989. It really was an old boys' club, but it absolutely isn't anymore. So that was very good for building my profile across the city.
And what were some of your responsibilities as the president there?
Well, facilitating our lunches with our guest business speakers. Could be some good speakers in there for your future podcast, actually. We'll have to have a chat about that
Most
afterwards.
Definitely, yeah.
Make a note of that one. Helping to organise the events. When I was first involved, we were averaging 40-odd at lunch, and the Christmas that I was president actually sold out at 150.
So it's a big club. For those that aren't in Nottingham and aren't aware of it,
yes.
It's a big club to be a part of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very much about creating better commerce, across the city. But the values of the club that are very solid, and date back to 1924. The club is very modern, but it still runs the traditional values. Those values sit with me. So in terms of sort of creating better commerce, which is what the club stands for, it's kind of what I stand for too. I want to do business simply on what I call a proper basis.
So as with all industries, with coaches and consultants, I would imagine it's a fairly competitive industry. And so how do you, Deborah, differentiate yourself from other coaches and consultants that are out there?
I think the thing that makes me different is that I have actually been at the pointy end of an SME, and I've been at the pointy end of an SME all my working life. I've seen the highs, I've seen the lows, I've had the sleepless nights, I've had times with very little resource and times with lots of it. I mean, just on that little bit, you'll see when people are in the high times, they're not careful. And then when they're in the low times, they have to be careful. But you should be careful all the time.
Yeah, I suppose it's that old saying, isn't it? Success breeds complacency. Something
yes,
like that.
It can do that. But I think having real hands-on business experience, and I'm not the legal expert, I'm not the HR expert, I'm not the accountancy and tax expert, but I've had to touch all those areas in my own businesses. And so I have knowledge, and whilst I may not have the answer, or I may indeed not be legally qualified to give that answer, I can certainly give good direction, and I can direct you to maybe the right person through my network, but I can help you form the questions that you need to ask, which will certainly cost you less in the end, because you're going to have a less amount of time with someone who costs a lot more than I do.
And do you think that's important for a business owner, to be asking good questions?
Yeah, I think it's important that they're asking good questions of themselves and of their team, but also good questions to the experts. And if you're in a place, and I've been here, where I absolutely knew I didn't know what I didn't know, so I knew I had to go and get some expert, if that's the right word, advice. But what I also knew, given all my past experiences, that I didn't have to take it. One example of that, when I was closing down the car body repair business, which we haven't talked about at all, I took 3 commercial valuations on that building, but I didn't agree, and I put it on the market for 30 grand more, and I got 2 offers on the same day. And and that was at a time when we needed to get every penny in the pot that we could.
So seeking expert advice is the right thing to do, but you're saying you don't necessarily have to take that advice.
Yeah.
How do you know when to take it and when not to? Is it gut instinct? Is it reflecting on past experiences?
Sometimes I think it's instinct, and I think you have to learn to trust your own instinct or gut feeling, whatever you want to call it. I mean, if I rewind, talking about the body shop, way back to 1990, we had a major fire and lost everything and had to start all over again. And I learned a huge amount of stuff through that process. And I've got lots of other examples, and we can stay and chat for another 2 hours. There's lots of examples that all go in the experience pot. And I think what differentiates me, to go back to your original question, from other coaches, consultants, business mentors, whatever the job title is having been at the pointy end is one thing. But then I've been on some really good, solid training that I've put time into, I've put money into, and I've learnt good coaching skills. I've learnt good NLP skills. And you put that all in the mix, it creates quite a unique skill set.
And so something that you mentioned there, Deborah, which has really piqued my interest, is the fire at the body repair shop. So was that everything was gone?
Yeah, absolutely everything.
So one day the business was there, everything was fine, everything was working. Mm-hmm. The next day you turn up and everything's been burnt down.
Well, it wasn't the next day. We actually knew about it that night because someone came and knocked on the door and said, your garage is on fire.
How do you come back from something like that?
Yeah.
So devastating.
It was tough. Emotionally, it was tough. And having to work out what you do next. I mean, I've put to give a bit of explanation around the fire. It was a whole block of industrial units. It wasn't just ours. So the fire started actually next door but one to us, and it just gutted the whole lot. In terms of what we did next, I mean, we had to find the customers whose cars were burnt down because we'd lost the records because they were in the fire as well. Wow. You're sweating just listening to the explanation of this.
Well, I can just imagine having to make a phone call telling a customer that their car has basically disintegrated.
And one was a vintage Stag. It was very hard. Very, very hard indeed at the time. But, we emerged, like the phoenix from the ashes sort of thing.
It literally is a phoenix rising from the ashes.
But there was lots of things that happened. I mean, we were in rented premises at that time and paying a pretty low rent, which we didn't appreciate we were paying because we weren't looking at the market. So when it became apparent that it was going to take a long time for that site to be rebuilt, and actually it never was rebuilt in the same way, they actually built a nursing home on it in the end. So when we started looking around at renting other premises, the rents were so much higher. Like, this doesn't make sense. We're better off buying somewhere. So we ended up buying somewhere. Quite a lot of detective work went into that because we identified some premises quite early on, but we were told by the agent that was selling them that they were sold. And I won't go into a huge amount of detail in that, but a couple of 3 months later, when the premises still hadn't been occupied, I set about finding the owner of those premises, and it was a company in Birmingham. And then I dealt directly with the owner of those premises. I'm not suggesting that's what you normally have to do, but...
So the agent had been telling you porkies?
Maybe. Okay. I'm not going to name who they were.
Okay.
It's some years ago. But the owner of those premises didn't have any inclination that anyone had any interest in them. So he came and met with us, and Mr. Barnshaw is a lovely chap, and he felt quite sorry for us, I think, with the situation that we were in. Anyway, so we did a deal with him, and... we eventually got the keys and we had to then set about kitting out the place. But it was an opportunity. Didn't feel like it necessarily at the time, but it was an opportunity because then we could modernise a lot of things that we'd have struggled to do in the existing premises. So we had, all the latest kit, low brake ovens, etc., but it was much bigger premises, so it made the business a very different shape. We had more staff, more of all the things that go with that. But one of the key lessons that came out of it was insurance cover. And we'd been with the same broker for a few years. And this comes back to getting advice, but not always having to, not always taking it or seeking another opinion. And as it transpired, we were quite underinsured when we started talking to a different broker. And so we renewed with a very different sort of policy. And had we have not done that, we'd have hit that fire very underinsured. So, that could have made what came next a very different story, couldn't it?
Most definitely. And I think apart from that, the thing that really strikes me there is what was a devastating situation, and that most people would look at and think, I'm never going to be able to recover from this, and probably just give up down tools there and then.
I don't give up though.
Well, obviously, and that's clear from many of the things that you've said already, but you actually managed to turn that into an opportunity which worked out for the best. So yes. I suppose if I was to ask you the question, if you could turn back time, would you have that fire happen again? What would your answer to that be?
Oh, blimey, that is one hell of a question. I wouldn't want to put anybody through what my business partner at that time went through. He'd started the business before I got involved. He was very devastated. It was almost like a bereavement. And there was so much then to do. And, working out with the loss adjusters and things like that, it was some really quite complicated stuff. And he was a craftsman. All that other stuff was not his area of expertise at all. I guess that's where my sort of crisis management comes in, I suppose. But I just picked it up and ran with it and sought the advice where I needed to and,
made it happen.
And
what would you say over the whole of your business career so far? If you could pick one standout moment, what would you say is your proudest moment or your biggest success so far?
I think in terms of the two bigger businesses that I've been involved in, I think with the car rental and the petrol station, actually finding a buyer and being able to move out on the Friday and give birth on the Monday, I think that was pretty good.
I think that'd be a pretty hard one to top, really, actually. Yeah, that's a good answer.
But at the same time, I think with the situation around closing the car body repair business was a very different situation. And the way that happened, I wouldn't particularly wish that on anybody either. But just the fact that I got us out the other side of what could have ended up being a pretty financial disastrous situation, I pat myself on the back for that one, if I'm perfectly honest, because I made something good out of something that was going very bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I think there's a lot of people that, given those same situations, would have given up and down tools there and then. But it just goes to show that the attitude, which you've alluded to already a few times, and I'm sure we'll talk about a bit more as well, as there is always a way. You just have to dig down and look hard enough for it, is something that's served you well so far.
Yeah.
And so obviously we've talked a lot about your past career leading up to Deborah Labbate and the work that you do with the consulting and the mentoring. What does the vision look like for the business moving forwards into 2020 and beyond? What are your plans? What are you hoping to achieve?
Moving forward, I've worked on a couple of projects over the last couple of years where I have worked with other people. And it has made me take stock a little bit and think, I miss that team bit. I work on my own a lot and I'm very used to it and I get on with it fine. But I do miss that team element sometimes. So moving forward for 2020, I'd like to look for one or two more meaty projects where I can collaborate and work with other people, because that sort of ticks a big box for me.
What sort of people are you looking for?
I've done things like managing premises moving. So I've worked with other people on that, and I quite enjoy not rolling my sleeves up to lift the boxes necessarily, but all the operational logistic stuff around a move. I enjoy that. Project management type stuff. I've also done quite a lot of stuff in hospitality with venue launches and things like that, which takes me away from sort of the business advice side of things, but it puts a lot of the other skills to good use. I've also launched just a couple of months ago Star Connections, which is something I was already doing. I've just decided to give it a different label because from a marketing perspective, I think that's easier because it differentiates the two things. So the Deborah Labbate Business Solutions Consulting continues, which incorporates the sort of spectrum as I've described, so the coaching, the mentoring and the consultancy. Star Connections is very much about the business strategy. I see a lot of people out networking, but quite mindlessly. So it's about the strategy behind that and where to do it, how to do it, who to do it with, and the execution of, and having a more rounded plan. But sort of in isolation, but not totally. You've got to make it fit into the rest of the business plan, which a lot of people also don't look at. So it's that, but it's also some events. I've got a big event coming up for International Women's Day on March the 8th, which is a concert. And all the information about that will be live shortly. And it's also about introductions and referrals. So that's what the Star Connections bit is.
Okay, and networking has definitely played a big part in the growth of the businesses of many of the guests that have been on so far. So obviously, if you can get it right, it can make a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of people that will call themselves experts in that area. This expert word keeps coming up, doesn't it? I wouldn't necessarily call myself an expert. I can only help people with what I know and what I've done and what's worked for me and what hasn't worked for me. So, again, it's coming from a place of experience more than anything. But one of the things that I take my clients through is a model of communication, which sometimes I go, what has that got to do with networking? And it's got everything to do with networking because it's about communication. And that model of communication comes out of NLP. I've done some work with a client called Young Professionals UK recently, and I've been going into academy schools and I've done it in universities, done it at Nottingham Trent University, and also with the City Business School in Moscow. And it's about how to network in the hidden job market, and it's the communication that comes into that. And I think if you can get that particular model into the minds of the next generation coming through, I wish I'd have had that. That would have changed my communication style a long time ago.
And could you give us some pointers or maybe your top tip from that model for enhancing your communication in these networking situations?
The way that I deliver it, it's got quite a lot of visuals with it, which you kind of need. But it starts with you. It doesn't start with the other people in the room. It starts with you, what's going on with you, what your values are, what your beliefs are. And it's about what you're filtering in and filtering out and how that's affecting your behaviour.
And so what difference does that make going out into the networking world when you've got all those nailed?
It feeds into how emotionally intelligent you are and therefore how you interact with other people and how you build rapport.
Yeah, so it's part of a much bigger process by the sounds of it. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Right, so Deborah, we know about your speciality, we know about your business journey and some of the highs and the lows as well, and thank you for being so honest and sharing those with us. I'd just like to find out a little bit more about your own beliefs about business. You obviously meet a lot of business owners in your line of work, and from past experience and from being the president of the Nottingham Business Club, what do you feel are some of the attributes and skill sets and beliefs that you've picked up on that you feel are required for somebody to be successful in any business?
I think it's really important that you have a very conscious understanding of your values, and depending on the size of the organisation, that could be your own personal values. If it's a small business, they probably seep into the business. If it's a bigger organisation, it's perhaps a different sort of values exercise. But really understanding what those values are and actually living them, not just having them stuck on a sign on the wall, actually eating, sleeping and breathing those values. It's understanding what your ultimate aim is and being clear on that and reviewing it regularly, because it will change. People change, the world changes, industries change, so you need to keep reviewing and sort of refreshing that. And then, having got that clear, you need to be resilient to execute whatever it is and have what I call bounce back ability. And if you can bounce back from any knockbacks, then the more often you bounce back, the more resilient you become. It's like a muscle, you kind of have to flex it. But I think the other thing to sort of just add into that at this point is it's not necessarily about when things are going wrong. Things can go really well and go almost better than you expected. And then you may have a whole different set of circumstances. I can remember being in a meeting with two people looking to start a business, and they were a little bit rose-tinted. They were good friends, and they thought they would always stay that way. But business can sometimes change that. And I've seen some absolutely terrific partnerships, but I've seen some really awful ones too. And I remember one of my questions to them was, if this is really successful and you make just pluck a figure out the air, you make your first million and you, pointing to one person, you're happy with that. You want to go and sit on the beach somewhere now, you've made your million, that's what you wanted. But the business partner, no, actually, now we've got here, I want to go to 2. That can cause a bit of discord between the two people. So it's having provision for coping with success as well as failure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So resilience, bounce back ability, determination, totally believing that there's always another way. It may not be the way you set out to do it, but there will always be another way. And being flexible and being prepared to change.
Okay, some great insights there. Thank you for sharing those. Now, what do you think are some of the things that people should know before they get into business? Obviously, you meet a lot of people at the startup stage as well that they may not necessarily be prepared for either in the first year or later on in life. What are some of the misconceptions that you tend to find people have of being a business owner?
If, for example, you're a widget maker and you're making widgets for ABC company and you think, I can do this for myself, you're a good widget maker in the beginning and nothing's necessarily going to change that. But you have to learn to be lots of other things as well. And this is where sometimes people will come unstuck. Once you get to a certain level and you can have team members that have got skills you haven't, that's great. But you still have to keep a bit of an understanding. Ultimately, the book is going to stop with you if you're the business owner. So whilst finance might not be your thing, operations might not be your thing, HR might not be your thing, you do need to have your finger on the pulse. You maybe not need to know every last bit of nitty-gritty, but you need to keep your eye on all of those things. And you need to keep your eye on your numbers.
Yeah, so essentially, once you start in business, you cannot just be the widget maker. Yeah. You have to become a business owner and know about all of those areas. And
so if you can, talk to people that have been there before you and get some knowledge before you start. But sometimes you just have to learn the hard way and get it wrong.
What's the best advice you've received?
There's always a way.
It's simple, but that's thrown me off guard.
Sorry.
It's right. There's always a way. There's not really anything I can lead on from that. It is what it is, isn't it?
There's always a way. You just have to go and find it.
And so if you could visit 21-year-old Deborah, what were you doing at the time then? Was it at the car hire?
Yeah, it was the car rental and the petrol stations.
So given all the experiences that you've had since then, if you could pass on just only one piece of advice to her, what would it be?
Learn to delegate sooner.
Okay, what difference do you think that would have made?
I'd have had more time to work on the business and not just in it.
Do you read, Deborah?
Yeah, I read, yeah.
So if you could pick one business book that you'd recommend to the audience, which one would it be?
Probably know me by now. You know you can't have one, don't you? I'll go with two.
Okay.
For two quite different reasons. One's a really quick read. In fact, if you go onto YouTube, there's a video that's about 1 minute, 90 seconds. And it's Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog.
Can you give us the summary?
Yeah, eating the frog is the big ugly thing, the thing you don't want to tackle. And the theory is that if you do that first, so first thing each morning you eat the frog, the day can only get better. I have a frog sits on my desk wearing a crown. I was in a florist picking up a bouquet and it was on the counter with a box of other things like it. And I'd just done something and I thought, do you know what? I'm having that frog with a crown on because I've just eaten one.
Just as a nice amount. And so,
a bit of a reward, if you like.
So for anybody out there that's thinking for a bit of meaning behind this, if you've got that task or that customer that you are cringing about speaking to or getting done, just get it done.
Get it done. Do it first.
The rest of the day tastes so much sweeter then.
Absolutely.
Okay,
and it's a brilliant book and it's a really quick read.
Okay, book recommendation number 2?
Would be Hiram Smith's What Matters Most, The Power of Living by Your Values.
Okay, I've not heard of that one. It sounds like it's going to be a hard one to summarise.
Yeah.
Or maybe the one lesson or the most important lesson that you took from that.
It took me 3 attempts to actually read it. It's not the easiest book to read, but it really made me begin to understand values and the importance of them and knowing what your own are and living by them. And
for any resources or books, etc., that we talk about throughout the interview, all of the links will be included at the show notes at benjaminbrain.co.uk. So I'll definitely be adding the titles of those 2 books there. Really interested in the second one that you've mentioned there.
Okay.
And so staying on the book theme, Deborah, if you could write a book about your own journey in business so far, what would you call it?
Ooh, well, I've written one already. The one big mistake people unwittingly make when it comes to time management and how to avoid it.
Okay.
I can give you a link to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll include it in the notes.
People can have that as a free ebook.
Brilliant, thank you.
The book that is currently partly written, and this is not an ex-husband bashing exercise at all. So let me just give you a bit of context. The book is called If My Husband Was a Client, I'd have sacked him years ago.
Okay.
But the line under that is Business Lessons Learnt. And there was a lot of business lessons learnt.
I like it. It's a catchy title. Sounds like a good book. So we'll be watching out for that one. So we've just got a couple more questions left, Deborah, before we wrap up for the interview today. So my first being, so of all the experiences that you've been through so far, the businesses you've been a part of, the lessons that you've learned, the ups and downs, if we were to be sat in front of somebody who is about to start in business right here, right now, and you could give them just 3 pieces of business advice to help them succeed as best as possible, what would they be?
So these are just starting out.
Yeah.
Do your research. Look at your competition and think out of the box of what that competition looks like. I'll give you an example. When I was working with startups through the enterprise agency, there was always somebody else wanting to open some kind of sandwich shop or whatever, and they were going to do something different. I'll take it to an extreme. It's going to be pink bread with a filling you've never heard of.
Yeah, sure.
Doesn't matter. You're still competing for the lunchtime market. So you've still got competition.
Yeah. So who would some of the competition be in that scenario that they may not have initially thought of? Is it that they're thinking they're only competing with other fancy artisan type of sandwich makers, but actually they're still competing with the Greggs and the McDonald's
Absolutely.
and everybody else?
Yeah, you're competing for a piece of that lunchtime market.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of competition, even though you're doing something different.
Okay, great advice. Number 2?
So my second bit of advice would be make sure you've got a good team around you. Not necessarily an employed team, but the people that you need to call on. So that's a good lawyer, a good accountant, and an accountant you can actually talk to. That's really, really important. Make sure you've got the right people around you to help you with your branding and your marketing and all those things. And the last bit around getting a good team around you is just think outside of the box with team. Because the team could be the person you live with. It could be one of your close friends. They're all going to support you in different ways, and they are actually part of your team. And it's really important to acknowledge that and make sure you've got that infrastructure around you.
That's an interesting perspective. I've never actually thought of it like that myself.
Yeah, when I've done presentations on that sort of topic before, and I've brought up that different bits of a team. I'll just give you one really simple example. I got an email from a lady a bit later in the day. She says, "I've really been thinking about what you said this morning." And she says, "My dogs are on my team." She says, "I've been resenting having to walk them in the morning and at night because it's, I haven't got enough hours in the day. But actually, when I walk them in the morning, I'm planning my day. And when I walk them at the end of the day, I'm filing my day."
Yeah, what a change in mindset.
Yeah, completely.
Okay, 2 great bits of advice. And your final one?
I've got to go back to the determination and resilience. You might have the passion for whatever it is you're about to start, but if you're not determined and resilient, you'll fall at the first hurdle. So you've got to really learn to flex your resilience and determination muscles.
Thank you, Deborah. 3 great pieces of advice there that have obviously been earned through experience and going through those situations yourself. So thank you for sharing those. And my final question for you this evening, if people want to find out more about you and the services that you provide and maybe want to connect with you, whereabouts can we find you online?
You can find me on my own website, which is deborahLabbate.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Deborah Labbate, which is Labbate. A lot of people try to put an extra T in there. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm Deborah Star. And you can also find the Twitter account for Star Connections. And you can find me on Facebook as Deborah Labbate. There's 2 profiles. One's my personal one, one's my business one. When you look, you'll see which one's which.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for sharing those. And as always, all of those links will be included in the show notes. So that wraps up today's interview, Deborah. So I just want to thank you again for taking some time out to share your experiences with us. I've really enjoyed my time with you tonight. Thank you for coming on to the show.
And thank you for inviting me. And remember to come back to me and check out those other potential speakers.
Most definitely. And as always, thank you to all of the listeners. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode as much as I have, and look forward to catching up with you on next week's episode of The Truth About Business. One final thing before you go. If you enjoyed this interview and want to make sure you don't miss out on the next episode with another real-life business champion, make sure you subscribe via iTunes, Spotify, your favourite podcast app, or by visiting my blog at benjaminbrain.co.uk and hitting subscribe. At the blog, you'll also find the show notes to this episode, which includes all the relevant links to the website, social media channels, contact details, and anything else that was discussed in the episode. Just type in the name of the guest, and that will bring that right up for you. And finally, I'm always on the search for great business owners who would be happy to spare just a couple of hours of the time to share their business experience with our audience. So if you know of anyone that would make a great guest, or you'd like to feature yourself, just let me know. Send an email to hello@benjaminbrain.co.uk and I'll reply personally as soon as possible. Also, if you've got any feedback, questions that you'd like me to ask our guests, or any other suggestions, I am definitely all ears. That email address again is hello@benjaminbrain.co.uk. So that's it for this episode. I just want to thank you sincerely for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay hungry, stay fearless, get out there and make it happen.